If you ask the average person on the street, they're going to tell you it's the gangbangers. They're going to say it's all about those young guys out there with guns in their hands shooting each other. That's what the problem is. And all we need to do is lock them up, or better yet, put them on a barge and just send them off to sea and then let the barge sink. That's what we need to do, and then all of our problems are going to go away. I've heard that I don't know how many times. And it's true in the sense that so many of these murders are being committed by the same demographic as the victims. So the victims are all young men. The perpetrators, by and large, are young men. Many of them are gang involved. That's very, very true. Something shifted in 2008. The press down there dubbed it Belize's 9/11. There was a big parade over Independence Day weekend. Independence Day in Belize is coming up in just a few weeks. Huge parade, streets lined with people. Somebody took a live grenade and threw it right in the crowd. The grenade went off, killed I don't know how many people. This was the first time that people started saying, uh-oh, we've got a big problem here. Not only do we have gangs, but the gangs are incredibly well armed. The pothole, that's the picture there, the pothole from the grenade, it's still there in the street as a stark reminder. But the reality about Belizean gangs is this. There are 23 gangs in Belize City. Belize City is a small city, about 64,000 people, less than, I would say that it's fewer than 100 square miles. Now, if you were to plot out on a graph where all the gangs were located, you would see that they're all right next to each other. Each gang operates in an area that's about 5 square blocks. Now, you can imagine, the term that we use here is balkanization. You can imagine what happens when you have these groups that are very well armed of teenage boys, for heaven's sake, who don't like each other, living in a small area. And they can't leave that area. And if they do leave that area, there are going to be violent repercussions. Now, what do you think happens when you have all these warring groups rubbing up against each other? It explodes. It's explosive. Most of the gangs in Belize are affiliated with LA gangs, Bloods and Crips, and there's a reason for that. We'll talk about that in just a minute. When I say affiliated, I don't mean that they're all part of the same gang. You have Bloods and Crips gangs in Belize, Bloods and Crips gangs in the U.S., but they're not really connected in any way other than the name. But here's the really disturbing thing. In the last 3 years, there's been an influx of some of the Latin American gangs. Now, if you know anything about gangs, you know that these Latin American gangs, MS-13 and 18th Street, these are the guys who will decapitate their victims. They don't just shoot their victims. These guys are incredibly well organized. MS-13 and 18th Street are gangs that began in Los Angeles back in the 1980s. The guys who were starting those gangs got deported. They went back to El Salvador and Honduras. But what they did on their way back was they created this international network. MS-13 and 18th Street are basically organized crime. You can't even call them gangs anymore. They have a tight network running from Honduras all the way up El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, and into the United States, and now into Belize. 4 years ago when I got to Belize, these gangs weren't there. 3 years ago when I got to Belize, they were just in the western part of the country working with the Spanish speakers. 2 years ago, they were in the capital city, which is right in the middle of Belize, gradually making their way eastward. And now, this past January, they carried out their first hit in Belize City. They decapitated 4 leaders from one of the larger Creole gangs, from one of the larger Crip gangs in Belize. What was amazing about that was that the news coverage lasted for about a day, and then it ended. Politicians talked about it for about a day, and then they stopped talking about it. Everybody stopped talking about it because everybody was scared. In a country that small, somebody knows your brother. Somebody knows your cousin. If you ask too many questions, they're going to kill you. Or they're going to come after you. So there's an atmosphere of fear right now in Belize. Government response. Well, the government has tried a couple different things here. The first response is kind of the typical response. They've tried using repressive tactics. So since 2008, there have been at least 5 different special operations that the military in Belize have carried out. The purpose of these operations is to clear the drugs out of the neighborhoods, clear the guns out of the neighborhoods. They raid people's houses. If you're a young male walking down the street wearing a backpack, the police can stop you anytime and search you. And there's not a thing you can do about it. And if you mouth off to them, you wind up in the back of their pickup truck, and then God knows where.